District 5 values the input of our community, and today's event is one way that we are listening to input and ensuring that we answer questions on redistricting. Both today's event and the event that we held on November 19th include live video featuring experts from Milone MacBroom, the firm studying capacity and growth in the district, and district staff. Questions can be submitted before the event or can be submitted live during the event. After today, any lingering questions can be submitted to our email address dedicated for redistricting, and that's redistricting@lexridge5.org. Again, that's redistricting@lexridge5.org. If you can view the graphic on the feed, we've created an easy to remember link for submitting your questions today. And that link is lexridge5.org/forum questions. That's lexridge5.org/forum questions. Again, the district certainly values the input of the community, and we want to thank you for your input and your questions on this very important topic for our district. So now we have some quick introductions before we get started. I want to say that the format of our Lunch and Learn will be a little different today. We have some introductory remarks from our presenters. And learning from last event we've added a few guests today to speak about topics we saw that were of interest to our community. So my name is Katrina Goggins. I'm Director of Communications for School District 5. I will be serving as the moderator for our Lunch and Learn event. Our Superintendent, Dr. Christina Melton, is participating. She'll join us in a few moments. Dr. Michael Harris is Chief Planning and Administrative Officer for the district. We also have our Chief Instructional Officer, Mr. Michael Giuliano. Lynn Richardson, our Chief Finance Officer for the district, will give some introductory remarks in just a moment. And we also have Dave Weissman, our Director of Transportation, who will speak in general terms about transportation. And of course, we have our two experts from Milone MacBroom, Mr. Mike Zumba and Mr. Patrick Gallagher. So we will begin now with our opening remarks, and we will start with Dr. Harris.
Good afternoon to everyone who has tuned in to this second of two virtual events to discuss the redistricting initiative here in School District 5. We are excited about this opportunity, continue to be excited about the work that Milone MacBroom has done and continue to do to support our district in balancing the enrollment and also carving out a space for our newly approved school, Piney Woods Elementary School. So certainly looking forward to the questions that you might have. And thank you again for tuning in this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harris. We're going to ask our Chief of Instruction to give a few introductory remarks and speak a little bit in general terms about instruction.
Thank you, Ms. Goggins. I know some questions have been posed regarding how would redistricting impact instruction across our school districts. And certainly, as far as instruction is concerned, no matter what model may be selected for redistricting, we're going to certainly make sure that the instructional components necessary for graduation, certainly at the high school level, will continue at all of our high schools, regardless of where students may attend. We're certainly going to make sure that we have gifted and talented programs throughout all of our schools, as they would. Even with the opening of Piney Woods, of course, they will have gifted and talented programs as well. So there's not a large instructional impact that redistricting has. And in addition to instruction, the magnet programs certainly fall under instruction as well. And our magnet programs will continue to take place at the schools that they're currently at. So with redistricting, there will not be changes of where the magnet programs go. Where they are for the 2021 school year is where they will be moving forward as well. So redistricting will not have an impact on where our magnet programs will end up. They are at the schools they will be at moving forward. So those are just a few remarks, Ms. Goggins. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Giuliano. We also received some questions from the community about the impacts of redistricting on funding, especially for the Irmo cluster specifically. So we've asked Mr. Richardson to provide a response and give some general remarks. Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, Ms. Goggins. Good afternoon, everyone. I think some of the questions were regarding the financial impact to the different clusters. I just wanted to briefly address that for you. The funding that we get from the state, redistricting will not impact that whatsoever. The only type of funding changes you may see at individual schools would just be due to changing of enrollments. Most of the resources that we allocate to our schools are done on a per pupil basis. But as far as overall funding for the district, this will not in any way affect that whatsoever. And I'll be glad to try to answer any more questions later if they come up, Ms. Goggins.
Thank you so much, Mr. Richardson. We also received some questions about transportation. And as I stated, our Director of Transportation is with us today. He's going to talk about his plans and the scenarios he's already viewed. Mr. Weissman.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I've had a chance to dig into all four of the different plans, looking at them from a transportation standpoint, looking at how we might best maintain the standards that we have in transportation and get the students to school safely. I worked with Dr. Harris and Van Holden on some of the numbers so I could understand what we might need to do as far as additional buses, if necessary, going forward, depending on which plan is chosen. So we have a rough draft plan probably for all four of the scenarios. We'll whittle it down as we get closer to the selection of a specific scenario. So we're just kind of watching, monitoring, and planning.
Thank you so much, Mr. Weissman. And then finally, Mr. Zumba and Mr. Gallagher, please give us a quick review of your roles and responsibilities in the redistricting process.
Mike, do you want to kick off with the kind of our charge, and then I'll get into some of the tools that we have available?
Definitely, Pat. Thanks, Ms. Goggins. I'll get us kicked off on really our charge for this process. When we get involved as part of a school redistricting and rezoning, especially one that's going to be implementing a school construction project, our primary role is to really create an attendance zone to be able to accommodate and to guide students into the new Piney Woods Elementary School. Looking back over the most recent history, we've not only followed but also projected going forward the overcrowding in the Chapin cluster, looking at that and the desire to no longer have an enrollment freeze going forward. It's really to be able to provide an attendance zone and to even out the balance of students there in order to ensure that we don't have overcrowding in that enrollment cluster there, as well as taking a look across the board at the various grade levels through our growth forecasting and seeing if there's any immediate areas that need to be addressed, as well as any longer term that may pop up down the road, and be able to incorporate those as part of our four scenarios in those recommendations to be mindful of what may happen in the future, and to give a plan that has a lifespan that matches our projection horizon of 10 years. You're muted, Pat.
Thanks, Mike. So I'll share my screen here, and I'll quickly go over just a real quick recap of the four scenarios, and then I'll get into the specific online tool and give folks a demo. So let's see here. All right. So let's start with scenario one. So we created four scenarios. We have longer presentations that are posted on the district website. And if you would like to view additional information on those, you can see it there. Are you guys seeing my full screen or just the part screen?
We get to the full, Pat.
Okay, great. So scenario one, as Mike said, we are really charged with creating a new attendance zone for Piney Woods and helping address overcrowding and really looking at enrollment balance across all schools. Each scenario really tried to accomplish a different objective. This one was really focused on disrupting as few students as possible. So it was really focused on the immediate task at hand, which was filling out that new Piney Woods attendance zone. So this one did create that new attendance zone for the school. However, it did not achieve that enrollment balance that we were looking for, especially at the high school level. Scenario 2 is similar to scenario 1. However, we also propose a solution to help address overcrowding at Chapin High School in the future. So this introduces 2 areas that we call phase-in areas, which I'll describe when I go over the interactive map tool. Some of the downsides of this option is that it does impact a greater number of students, and it would introduce a split feeder where some students who are currently in the Chapin cluster would switch to Dutch Fork for high school. Scenario 3, we really took a step back and really focused on balancing enrollment across the district, not just within the Chapin cluster. For scenario 3, we were really able to optimize enrollment across the board so that every building was efficiently used. However, by doing this, it did result in some overcrowding at Dutch Fork Middle School, as well as inefficient use of space at Chapin Intermediate. So under this option, we moved 5th grade into the 3 elementary schools within the Chapin cluster. So that results in 5th grade being pulled out of Chapin Intermediate, and so you're not really using that building very efficiently with just 6th grade. The counterpoint of trying to really optimize enrollment is that you have to move a lot more students, and not only are we moving more students, but we're moving many different neighborhoods. And whenever Mike and I do redistricting, we always try to keep peer groups in mind because if you're moving with more peers in your class, it tends to make that transition easier. If you're moving smaller groups of students, they're less likely to have peers in their new school, and that makes the redistricting process more impactful for those families. So that's definitely a negative here. And finally, scenario 4 is kind of a hybrid between scenario 1 and 2, where we tried to minimize disruption, and scenario 3, where we were trying to optimize enrollment. Again, this does focus on achieving that enrollment balance across the board, but not moving as many students as we did under scenario 3. And we also, again, introduced a split feeder at the high school level in order to and actually in the middle school level as well, in order to ensure that we're not only achieving balance at the elementary level, but at the middle and high schools as well. And this has moderate redistricting impacts. So what I'll do now is I will move over to the online platform, and I just want to share that window. Bear with me one second.
And Pat, while you're doing that, I will add to that, as we looked at the redistricting options across the various grade levels, those are different recommendations that could be put in place at different points in time. With the elementary school and the opening of Piney Woods and the overcrowding in the Chapin cluster being the most pressing, the one that needs to be put in place for next school year, so we can populate that school. And then some of the ones that take a look at more detailed phase-in areas, as well as redistricting at the intermediate, middle, and high school levels, those are more geared towards the midpoint, so about 4 or 5 years out in our projection horizon, that they could be sort of decoupled and be implemented at that point in time.
Thanks for that, Mike. So now I'll quickly go over our online platform. Typically during a redistricting process, we appreciate meeting with folks in person. It's a lot easier to have those conversations, but obviously this year has been a little bit different, and in order to try to maximize participation and get people the information they need, we created an online platform which has interactive maps that allow folks to view the different options under consideration, as well as provide feedback. So I'll just go through the platform. We did receive a few questions over the last month and a half or so about how to use the platform. So these are interactive maps, so you're able to zoom in and out. You're also able to search by address. So if I just type in 1200 Dutch Fork Road as an example, You click, and then it zooms to that location on the map. If you want to get back to the full screen, just hit this little home button. Alternatively, if you have location enabled on your device, you just hit this little crosshair button and it will zoom to your location. So another question we had is, how do I find out which intermediate, middle, and high school attendance zone I'm in under the different scenarios? And the maps here show the elementary attendance zones in color in order to find out the intermediate, middle, and high school attendance zones. You simply click on your location on the map, and a little table will pop up, and that shows the 5th, 6th, middle, and high school for your location under the different options. So this shows scenario 1. As you keep scrolling down, it will bring up the maps for the different scenarios. So this is scenario 2. The map looks very similar, but one of the differences that we have here is the introduction of what we call phase-in areas. So if we click, let's say, on a neighborhood in the Lake Murray attendance zone, you'll see in the table we have high school phase 1 and high school phase 2. This gets to what Mike was talking about earlier, where the high school overcrowding that we're projecting isn't an immediate concern. However, it's something that the district will need to monitor, especially once we get 5 years out and beyond. And so the phased-in approach really is allowing the district to move areas as needed when enrollment pressures really warrant. Scenario 3 and 4 can be accessed by continuing to scroll down. Again, we're using the same colors across all of the different scenarios. And again, by clicking on a specific neighborhood, you're able to see which area you live in under this scenario. And finally, scenario 4. I will note that these maps are easiest to see on a larger screen, so I would recommend using them either on a desktop or laptop computer or tablet. They may be a little more difficult to view on a phone if they will work, but it may be just a little more difficult to view the table. So I would definitely recommend using a larger screen if possible. And happy to answer any specific questions that folks may have about specific neighborhoods or specific scenario in the Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. And we mentioned before that our superintendent, Dr. Christina Melton, would join us. I want to give her an opportunity to make her introductory remarks. Dr. Melton.
Ms. Goggins, thank you so much, and welcome to all of you. Thank you for being a part of a brand new chapter of School District 5 history. That would be inclusive of redistricting and also the idea of our lunch and learn that we have provided today. Thank you for making this a part of your day to join us. And thanks to Mr. Zuba and Mr. Gallagher, of course, for being our partners in this and their expertise that they've lent to School District 5. Dr. Harris, of course, with his coordination, and Ms. Goggins with her moderation. So we are thankful that she has the moderating skills that she does. She is not for hire of any major network. We're going to keep her right here with us. Parents and community members, I want to thank you for your engagement with this process. So many emails have been sent in to our redistricting email address. Our team has answered each of the emails that we've received. We have some that are in the inbox right now, so there may be a timestamp on some that have a longer delay than people would hope. But please know that our staff is making sure that we get the answers to the questions that you've had. This opportunity, of course, is one that we created to be considerate of this virtual environment that we are offering now during this time of COVID that's affected our community and our world. So this shows a commitment of School District 5. I don't know if our original vision has been shared already or not, because I am at a state meeting with other superintendents today, so I've stepped out to find a quiet place that I could have this. But just for my assurance of saying this, our original vision was to have an interactive event where you all physically could come and see maps and interact with our staff and our team to ask questions of. And now that, of course, operations have changed, we needed to find a way to do things differently. So the scenario map that Pat went over with you all, the active site that we have that people have been using so much to review, to be informed, those are things that we've already implemented. Of course, our redistricting email address that I mentioned earlier is very active and very well known, but we need your help to help spread this information to others. It's likely you have circles in your neighborhood, within your circles of friends or social networking or worship choices that you may have. If you know people that reside in School District 5, whether they have children in school already or not, this is important for all community members of School District 5 to know this is going on. This is a very important process for our Board of Trustees. Because you all are in our community, you are aware that elections were recently held last month in November. So it's been a commitment of this administration and interest of the board now that it's seated to make sure that we have time to prepare them with information, to equip them. The important decisions they're making, we are not going to be irresponsible with. The conversations of having this engagement for all of you, and of course your outreach and availability to our board, it will be the will of the board as to what may happen that could come next. So we've inserted this pause to give this lunch and learn experience that is a second of 2 events that we had a few weeks ago on a Thursday afternoon that Dr. Harris, Ms. Goggins, and I were able to join in on. And so this is a second of the 2 events. We hope that you all will help us spread the word, help us to get information out, not to form opinions necessarily, because I believe everyone has the value of having their own, but please help us communicate this to all the circles and interactions you have within School District 5. Ms. Goggins, because I was late, anything that you needed me to say that maybe I did not include, or any questions that you may have received from me already?
No, thank you, Dr. Melton. There are some questions that are coming into the feed, so I do want to share with our viewers that we are monitoring the form, and I'm going to present now how you can submit questions during our event. We've come up with an easy to remember link for submitting questions today. And that link is lexridge5.org/forum questions. The received one is recent as 12/20, so they are coming in. We're going to get to as many of those questions as we can today, including some for our administration. So please submit your questions to us. We are watching the feed and we will answer those questions. And we're going to start with our questions now. Today, this first one is one that is a frequently asked question, and it is about exemptions. We call them exemptions. Others have called them grandfathering. We don't like to use that term. The question is, will there be options for grandfathering? And I believe Dr. Harris and Dr. Melton answered that question at our first event.
Absolutely, Ms. Goggins, and certainly yield to any additional comments Dr. Melton would like to share with us. But we did indicate that we've heard and certainly received that request by a number of families to include students themselves who have some interest in exemptions, i.e. the grandfathering that many of us are so familiar with. We like to use the term exemptions, as you've indicated. That is something that we continue to explore as we continue to move down this path of working toward some clear identification and finalizing this redistricting initiative. We certainly want to bring forward information related to what the exemption opportunities and options will look like here in School District 5. So yes, we received that information. And yes, we are looking toward putting pen to paper to map out what those options might look like for our students and families who may have be impacted by the redistricting initiative.
Excellent. The next question is, when will a decision be made? I believe Dr. Melton fielded this question, and we have received a number of questions that are really pointed to the school board. We'll be sure to share those with our board. But Dr. Melton will answer this question. When will this decision be made?
Ms. Goggins, thank you for that. And I just realized, listening to Dr. Harris, I failed to mention the FAQ resource that Ms. Goggins and her team have created. So Ms. Goggins, if you'll make sure that you follow up to answer that for those that are listening in, that they know that's an additional resource in addition to the things that I described a few moments ago. So for you all to hear the answer to the involvement of the board, obviously the board has met twice this week for special called meetings. The next board meeting is scheduled for, regularly scheduled board meeting is scheduled for Monday night, December the 14th. Per board policy, the board chair and the superintendent work together to develop the agenda. I have worked with, of course, Chair Hammond and our board officers, Mr. Lovelace and Ms. Gardner. They're two of the three officers. Ms. Hammond, of course, is a third as our board chair. So that agenda has been drafted at this point. Anything that makes it to the agenda, of course, comes before the full board. We're also considering the idea of how we can bring board members that are new to this process up to speed. So at this time, we're not ready to publicize what those dates and processes may look like. However, we will say this certainly will be discussed with the board in public. Any action or any will of the board that leads to action will be done in public. I would encourage everyone to watch the agendas. Our board is very accessible. They've received a lot of emails, a lot of phone calls, a lot of people that are having conversations in our community when they see them. So I'd encourage you to find the best way that's most comfortable for you to engage with our board. And Ms. Goggins, for this group to hear today, our audience today, the information for contacting our board is also on our website. So Ms. Goggins, if you could share with the group the FAQ piece and also how to contact the board. But as I summarize that response, the board will be involved with making decisions. This will be scheduled in public. I would encourage you to watch when the board agendas are posted so that you can see if it's on the next agenda or not. And then you could see how things are going to be paced out over time. Ms. Goggins.
Thank you, Dr. Melton. As Dr. Melton mentioned, contact information for our board members can be found on our district website, lexridge5.org. You go to the About Our District tab and click the Board of Trustees information tab there. And you'll see information, bios, and contact information for our board members. You can also view information about our past board meetings and agendas for upcoming board meetings on that page. So that's lexridge5.org, About Our District, and Board of Trustees. Click that link and that will take you there. We do have a web page for information on redistricting. We've created a vanity link that we hope is easy for the community to remember. That's lexridge5.org/redistricting. And there on that page, you can find our FAQ. You can also find the video recording of our November 19th virtual event, along with some other information on redistricting. So we'll reiterate that throughout the event today, but we wanted to share that with you. And now we'll go back to some questions. This next one was submitted this morning, and this is for our experts from Milone MacBroom. What led to plans to split up neighborhoods down Johnson Marina Road? Can you expand on why plans divide this neighborhood from that peninsula and why those numbers make an impact on the totals needed for the schools you would be moving them to? So Mr. Gallagher and Mr. Zumba.
Thanks, Mike. Do you want to kick us off while I can get the map up and running?
Yeah, I think so. I think the map would be helpful, Pat, to go through the interactive part of it. So as we go about this process, we're not only sort of working towards enrollment targets, which we are, but we're looking at what are logical areas to be able to have sort of that boundary mesh. And I know we did look at this individual road ahead of this meeting, and I know under different options, there's one or two where it is impacted and the others where it's not impacted. We always end up with trying to find the logical dividing line, between where one district boundary ends and another begins. And sometimes it ends up being a main road. Other times it ends up being some vacant land in between, some residential housing. So I think, Pat, you were able to get us right in that area now.
Yeah, I believe scenario 2 is one of the options where this neighborhood is located within a phase-in area for high school. Mm-hmm. So in phase-in area, in the phase-in area number 2, which we're just throwing out as an estimated date, 27-28 school year, could be earlier or later depending on how actual enrollment shakes out. But this is one where it was really due to overcrowding at Chapin High School and the need to move additional neighborhoods within the Chapin cluster to Dutch Fork High School in order to address overcrowding. And as Mike said, it's about proximity as well as size. In phase one, we are moving the neighborhood within the Chapin cluster that's closest to Dutch Fork High School. Unfortunately, that only buys us time. It doesn't solve the problem permanently. And so in order to free up additional space, so if you were to move this first phase in area up here, that would help address overcrowding for a few years, but eventually that overcrowding is projected to come back. Therefore, we need to move in another area within the Chapin cluster over to Dutch Fork High School under this scenario. And again, we focused on moving areas that were the closest to Dutch Fork High School while also grabbing large enough areas in order to address the overcrowding that's forecasted.
Yeah, and I think, Pat, this also, it's a good time just to touch on the point you made earlier about peer group size. It comes down to trying to be able to move enough so it's impactful to reduce the overcrowding, enough so that you have a peer group of a certain size. So, you know, there's continuity within the neighborhood of students that are moving together with their peers, but also being mindful of not creating too much disruption. So there's a little bit of finding that right balance there. And under this scenario, that was the logical dividing line for us to be able to sort of strike that balance between those different areas.
Excellent. Thank you for that. This next question is about the timeline that led to our scenarios. It's an individual asking for additional time for the community to become familiar with them. Mr. Gallagher, Mr. Zumba, if you would talk about the timeline, also, how did we come to these scenarios? Who did you consult with? So if you can address that for us.
Okay, Pat, I'll gladly get us started and then pass over to you on it. I think the overall timeline of the project has been about a year. We began doing the growth forecasting, understanding programming, enrollment targets, and really getting through a bulk of that work last winter into the springtime. I think we kicked off around late fall last year, had various focus group meetings, and presented the body of that work due to the slight delays with COVID back in July. At that point in time is when we really began launching sort of our virtual platform, realizing that we can't do the traditional workshops where, you know, Pat and I would be down there with some maps, some boards, some Sharpies, some sticky notes, and working with you hand in hand. We launched an online survey to be able to gather and get input on what values were in the community, to help guide us in our redistricting, and work with the Board of Trustees to put together our primary and secondary guiding criteria. And that was back at the July meeting. We later came back in the August meeting and cemented those guiding criteria, as well as talked about the survey results. And I can't remember the exact number, but we had a pretty robust, I think it was 7,500 or so respondents to that online survey for those few weeks it ran in the summer. Pat and I then went back into our offices and crafted these 4 options based on the guiding criteria, our analysis of the growth forecasting, and the input we received on values in the community, and presented those at a workshop to the Board of Trustees back in early October. We got input at that point in time, and then did a later Board of Ed meeting. I believe it was towards the end of October. I don't have the date offhand, but then presented to the full Board of Trustees then at a public meeting, and addressed questions and had a Q&A session as well. Since then, we've been actively fielding input via the email address, as well as being able to put out there in the community virtually the online mapping platform for others who didn't get a chance to either watch the video or peruse the slide decks to understand what it means from them. So really the last about 2 months or so, we've been fielding community input on this and taking that into consideration as we move towards sort of getting, that final option, or what that option may look like that the Board of Trustees will make a decision on and ultimately implement. Pat, do you have anything to add?
Nope. Good job.
Thanks.
Thank you. This next question, I think we heard at our last event. Would the board consider only rezoning for Piney Woods Elementary School, the most urgent need, and leave the other clusters and schools unchanged until a later date? I believe Dr. Harris and Dr. Melton tag teamed on that answer before.
Ms. Goggins, with me being in a different location, it's hard to tell who's going first. So I got the mic first, Dr. Harris, so I'll take it. We, of course, cannot speak for the board. So when it comes time for conversations, it has been publicly shared where we are as far as action with the board. This, of course, has not been covered with the board since, I would imagine, was it October, Dr. Harris? The new board was seated on November the 16th.
That is correct.
So if you were to go back and look at the archives of Ms. Goggins, you could share with the public where they could find that if they haven't seen that last discussion of the board that was seated at that time. We're not able to speak on behalf of the board and cannot predict what they would do. I can say as an administrative team, we do need Piney Woods Elementary prepared for staffing. Our human resources team starts working with principals in the month of January and February. And of course, layer that with our choice and magnet process that we have going on, that is in January and February, has already kicked off, of course, in many situations. There's a lot of the administrative responsibilities that can complicate or that could supplement, depending on which angle you'd like to look through. I'll choose supplement because there's so many moving parts that come together for the operations of School District 5. So Dr. Harris and I, of course, have an interest of the operations with transportation and other variables of School District 5. But at this time, the will of the board has not been to take action. And until it's back on a public agenda, there will not be further updates for the community as far as what they could expect.
Excellent. Our next question is about magnet programs and school of choice. And I think Mr. Giuliano touched on this before. What is the impact of redistricting on our magnet programs district-wide? Mr. Giuliano, can you address this?
Absolutely. So our magnet programs, regardless of any of our redistricting options, will maintain and stay in the current location that they are. That has to do with the magnet programs and also our magnet schools. So they will remain in the same locations regardless of redistricting outcomes for the 2021 school year.
Thank you so much, Mr. Giuliano. We have another question. This one is about COVID-19's impact. The long-term effects and economic fallout of COVID-19 are unknown. How do we account for the impacts of this in the redistricting plan? This is a multi-part question. Did we account for this in the plan? And has there been any consideration for the long-term effects of COVID on the current scenarios? So it's a two-part question. I think the first, for our experts, did we at all factor COVID-19 into any of our redistricting plans?
I'll begin on that question, and Pat, feel free to chime in. Going back to, and this will be a little bit of history, going back to the great economic recession of 2007, 2008, we started at that time when we do growth forecasting as part of any school redistricting, any school construction plan, to develop low, medium, and high enrollment projection models. And as part of those, they factor in a range of conditions. And some of those range of conditions include further boom in housing, or as well as a further bust in economic conditions. They don't specifically factor in a pandemic. My 20-year career, I didn't think I'd ever have to face doing enrollment projections during a pandemic, but you never know. But what we do have is a range of different enrollment that can go forward. And we look at those low, medium, and high projection models as we're going through these school redistricting scenarios, and as we're looking at those enrollment targets, and try best to be able to make our assumptions in this on when we think things will get back to quote unquote what was once normal. And we want to be able to test what plan we're putting out there under those various models to ensure that they all have those 4 scenarios all have viability under a range of economic conditions. Pat, do you want to add anything to that?
The only thing I'll add is I think it really has the greatest impact in the further out years in our projections. We still have some very near-term challenges that we're trying to address with the redistricting scenarios, including obviously the new school that's opening next year, as well as overcrowding. As we get further out and are projecting overcrowding at other facilities into the future, that's something that will be closely monitored and may buy the district some additional time perhaps before it has to implement measures to address it.
And Pat, before I pass it off, I think that's a great point. And I think just like going into into space planning and getting the school year set up, regardless of District 5 or every district across our country, there was a lot of unknowns with that and some uncertainty on what everything would look like. I think having a plan that has some flexibility in it, as we built in some space buffers there, is important because not knowing what that immediate rebound is going to look like, and we did structure it in a way to be able to implement, right from the get-go what's needed for the 21-22 school year with the opening of Piney Woods, as well as giving a peek ahead of where you may see some of these enrollment pressures. And that is something that, can be kept in sort of the back pocket and monitored as it rolls forward. But you do have it there in your plan with the ability to be able to implement that if needed.
I'll simply say before we turn it back over to Ms. Goggins that coupled with all of that is obviously the idea about enrollment. And even on last night, as we met at a special call board meeting, we talked a bit about our 45-day enrollment. That is, all of this pertains to the monitoring and the necessity of monitoring our enrollment throughout the course of the year. And so working with Mr. Zuba and Mr. Gallagher, and obviously working with our planning and accountability department, we are in frequent conversations and talks about what our enrollment looks like, to include that of the projection that you just heard presented by Mr. Zuba and Mr. Gallagher. So to the community, I would simply say to know that those on both ends of the spectrum, that we are paying close attention to all the available information that is available to us as we project forward over the not only next year, but even so far as the next 10 years as to what enrollment might look like here in School District 5.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. And I just want to remind our viewers that you can submit your questions. There on the screen, you can see the graphic. We've come up with an easy to remember way for submitting those questions during our Lunch and Learn. That's lexridge5.org/forum questions. We are getting a few in. I'll say that we have 20 plus viewers at our Lunch and Learn today. We had over 80 viewers at our first event. So we certainly do value input. Go ahead and submit your questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can today. This next question is about our scenarios, and it's asking, are there any possible other scenarios? This might be a good opportunity for us to kind of review the 4 for people who have joined us late. There are 4 scenarios, so I turn it over to Mr. Zumba and Mr. Gallagher to talk about the 4 that we have.
Sure, let me get my screen share back up. All right, so I'll give just a quick recap of the scenarios. And these are the 4 that are under consideration at the moment. Should the board wish to explore a different option or a combination of different options, can everybody see that? Then we would be happy to do that. And sometimes it's I like an element of this scenario, but I also like another element of another scenario we could potentially combine. But again, that's ultimately at the discretion of the board. So we'll wait for their guidance in terms of which direction they want to go. But none of these 4 are the final scenarios. I will say that, or none has been selected. So just to briefly give a recap of the different scenarios. For all scenarios, we're trying to balance enrollment and create an attendance zone for the new Piney Woods Elementary School and really ensure that efficient use of space across the district. We also had secondary criteria, and that really was minimizing impacts and disruption to students and families. When we ran our survey over the summer, that was identified as really the top concern within the community. Folks really concerned about potential impacts, proximity, and maintaining neighborhoods together and keeping them together to the greatest extent possible was also a consideration as well. And what we found over the course of doing the scenarios was that there's give and take. Some scenarios will do a really good job at one of the criteria, but not such a great job with another criteria. So scenario 1, we were really focused on trying to minimize disruption to students and families. And to that end, we were really focused within the Chapin cluster itself. So most of the impact would be a result of filling out the new Piney Woods Elementary School, which you can see in pink here. And so primarily the impacts would be within the current Chapin Elementary and Lake Murray Elementary attendance zone. Another area that we addressed in scenario 1, and this is in other options as well, was we are forecasting some overcrowding at Irmo Elementary School. And so we did shift a small neighborhood to Nursery Road. We do understand that that is a school of choice, and that does give the district some additional flexibility in terms of using that space to the greatest extent it can. Whenever we're planning for redistricting, we always leave some space for headroom. We never want to fill a building to the max. However, when you are running a magnet or a choice program, you have discretion in terms of the number of choice or magnet students you let in, and therefore you have the ability to operate the building at a higher efficiency than a school that just has an attendance zone. So this is also a neighborhood that you'll see on several of the scenarios. One of the drawbacks of scenario 1 is that we're focused on minimizing disruption, and as a result, we did not solve the overcrowding at Chapin High School because we did not change we largely kept the existing high school feeder pattern intact with the exception of a small neighborhood within Ballantyne. Scenario 2 is very similar to scenario 1. There's a couple of differences. The first is we added 5th grade to Piney Woods under this option. That allows us to shrink the size of the Piney Woods attendance zone. It also provides some flexibility at Chapin Intermediate School because you are removing some 5th graders, so that does give that a little additional wiggle room.
And Pat, if I may, if you could just zoom in there, just that shrink the size of Piney Woods Elementary School, I think is important and a differentiating factor. If you could just zoom in a little bit and show the difference of that attendance zone between 1 and 2 there, just so everybody at home can understand.
Sure. So in scenario 1, one of the negatives that we identified was that we are moving some neighborhoods into Piney Woods, which is this area in pink, that are very, very close to Chapin Elementary School. So that's not the most desirable neighborhood to move. Under scenario 2, we're able to keep those neighborhoods immediately around Chapin Elementary within Chapin. And that's one of the benefits of having 5th grade is it allows us to shrink the size of the attendance zone. Scenario 2 also introduces those phase-in areas that I mentioned before that would gradually shift from Chapin High School to Dutch Fork High School sometime in the future as enrollment pressures warrant. Again, the exact date would need to be determined at a later date, but something to closely monitor. And as enrollment is approaching capacity at Chapin High School, these phase-in areas could be implemented. But again, scenario 2 was largely focused on the Chapin cluster and minimizing disruption to students and families. Scenario 3 takes a little bit of a different approach, where we're really focused on optimizing enrollment across all buildings in the district. And that comes at the expense of disruption. This is by far our most disruptive option, where we're moving a lot of small areas in order, again, to optimize enrollment throughout the district, not just in the Chapin cluster. One of the negatives we found here is that by shifting, so we're alleviating overcrowding in the Chapin cluster, but that ends up shifting overcrowding to Dutch Fork Middle School. So that's a negative on this one as well. We also move a lot of small neighborhoods. So if you zoom in on the map and click some specific neighborhoods, you'll notice some of these areas that we're moving are very small. And therefore, there's going to be smaller peer groups. And that would make the redistricting more impactful to those students and families in those areas. And finally, scenario 4 takes more of a balanced approach between scenarios 1 and 2, where we're minimizing disruption, and scenario 3, where we're striving to optimize enrollment. This is kind of an in-between option. Again, we are focusing a lot of our efforts within the Chapin cluster with the new Piney Woods Elementary School. However, we do have some small pocket redistricting, which is what we call redistricting areas that are pretty small. They're not very large, but they do help optimize enrollment in certain neighborhoods. There are fewer of those pocket areas compared to scenario 3. We also introduce phase-in areas as well for this option at both the middle school and the high school level. So there are certain elementary attendance zones that would be split between 2 different middle and high schools to, again, ensure that we achieve that balance across all the different grade groupings. And again, I'm happy to answer any specific questions about a particular option or a particular neighborhood if folks want to submit those.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gallagher. Our next question is about choice. In fact, we've received a number of questions about students who are in schools based on choice. How does choice impact overcrowding in the Chapin area? Dr. Harris, I'll ask you to go first, and then if Dr. Melton would like to talk about the importance of choice in our district.
Thank you so much. And if I heard the question, it's how does it impact in the Chapin area specifically? If that is the case, let me begin by responding that to date, the Chapin schools, with the exception of Chapin High School, approximately about 2 years ago now, all of the schools in the Chapin area have been closed to school of choice. And with the exception of Chapin High School, which came online about 2 years ago now. And that will continue until we have some definitive idea as to how and what direction we'll go regarding redistricting. At that particular time, administratively, we'll look at all of our schools and look at the space availability and make some determinations about how we proceed regarding choice options in the Chapin area. School of choice, as we know it, as we heard from Mr. Giuliano earlier, will remain, and we certainly one of our prized possessions here in District 5, choice options as well as our magnet options. But that is an administrative determination that we'll make once redistricting has come to a close as to how and, quite frankly, how many seats. You heard Mr. Gallagher talk about ensuring, as they navigated their process, ensuring that there's ample headroom, available space, a little wiggle room, as I oftentimes refer to it, in schools. So that is something that we'll have to kind of see what that wiggle room, what that headroom looks like to make a clearer and more informed decision about school of choice options. So that is something that I don't have a firm response on today, other than to simply say that that is yet one of the areas in which we will continue to explore upon the close of the redistricting initiative.
Ms. Goggins, I know you set me to follow Dr. Harris. I don't know what's left to be said. So Ms. Goggins, if that response did not completely cover the questions that you just posed, I'm happy to assist, but I believe that was a pretty comprehensive response.
Great job, Dr. Harris. Great job as always. So our next question is for our experts. What specific enrollment data are you using for the 2020-21 column in scenario 4? What specific enrollment data are you using for the 2020-21 column in scenario 4?
Pat, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So all of our scenarios are were developed over the summer, and 2020-21 is our first projected year of enrollment. We do understand that's different than your actual for the 2021 school year, but that's our first projected year. That's developed based on your historic enrollment information. Our models based on our student information system, where we have all of your students mapped, and that allows us to develop projections for all of the different scenarios that takes into consideration housing growth, areas that are going to be growing quickly. After we met with the planning department, we identified specific neighborhoods that were determined to be high growth. It also takes into consideration choice and magnet programs as well.
And Pat, I will add too, as part of all the planning work that we've been doing in your district as well as other districts, we're seeing some vast enrollment deviations from the norm across the board, and this is running clients up and down the East Coast of the U.S. And realizing that our best proxy for what enrollment looks like going forward reflects our projections rather than using our enrollment that takes a look at what has happened through the pandemic. So as part of that planning, we've been using projections for this fall, not just in your district, but across the board on all of our work.
Excellent. We want to remind folks that they can definitely submit their questions on the form. They can do that via an easy to remember link. That's lexridge5.org/forum questions. That's lexridge5.org/forum questions. Our next question: given the extreme circumstances involving the virus, does it make sense to deter intermediate, middle, and high school kids at this time, since the projections are for 4 to 5 years out? So I know at our last event, we had a number of questions about whether or not we could just rezone Piney Woods and defer the rezoning or redistricting of the other areas. Dr. Melton, I'll look to you and Dr. Harris to address this.
If we were to review the contract that the board approved, Dr. Harris and our team could explain the different components of the contract. Of course, this contract is currently being executed, but it requires the will of the board for any changes. So the scenarios that have been presented to the board, it will be up to the board as to what their will may be, whether that's to accept the scenario that's presented to them, whether they were to execute some revisions to some of the scenarios, or not take action at all. It really is going to be up to what the board decides to do once all of them have the confidence that they are prepared for this discussion.
Excellent. Dr. Harris, did you want to add anything to that? I saw you unmic.
I did. I typically don't follow Dr. Melton when she gives a very complete and comprehensive response, but I just think it's important because we do hear this question quite frankly. And so I just felt it important to reiterate that it is the will of the board that really drives what happens next. So as much as we would want to offer a complete response and a firm response at this particular time, it is really what the board chooses to do as we go forward that's going to drive the remaining portion of this initiative.
Thank you so much. And we are getting questions in, and we do have some people joining us late. This next question, I think we addressed earlier during our lunch and learn, but we'll ask again. Is there a plan for exemptions? Are there any special exemptions to allow students to remain in the school they are currently attending via the redistricting plan? Dr. Harris?
Absolutely, and great question. I appreciate the question. We do continue to hear from a number of our families and students in particular about what this redistricting initiative means to them, and contingent upon the outcome, what does it mean regarding the opportunity to stay and to stay put in the schools in which they have come to know. With that being said, we will, as we move closer to finalizing the redistricting initiative, explore and continue to explore as many options as we possibly can to support our students and support our families. However, again, today, we don't have a firm response on exemptions, oftentimes referred to as grandfathering, but we like to use the term exemption. But please note to the persons who are connected with us via live stream or on air that exemptions is or are will be explored as we continue to finalize this particular project with redistricting.
We have a question for our experts, and I think this is a perfect time to demo the interactive map. Someone asking, I'm a student at Chapin High School, how can I see what school I would be rezoned to if redistricting is implemented? So without the exact address, I know we cannot do that, but perhaps a demo of the interactive map would help.
Sure. Let me get that up. So on the district redistricting webpage, there's a link to our online interactive map. And these maps allow you to see how you would be impacted under the different scenarios. So in order to find how a scenario impacts you, you use the little search or magnifying glass icon here and type in your address. So I'll just use an example here on Dutch Fork Road. That will then place a little marker on the map. You then click, and this little table is going to pop up, and that will show you how it impacts you at the high school level. The map, if you were to zoom all the way out, the colors represent the elementary attendance zones, and to keep things simple, we felt it would be too complicated to throw all the intermediate, middle, and high school boundaries on top of that. So yeah, simply click on the location and review the table. The other option is to use this Find My Location tool. If you have a location enabled on your device, you can simply click this and it will zoom to the location on the map. I won't be able to demo it because I'm in Connecticut, but this should be able to find your location as well. And again, just simply click on the blue dot that gets posted, and that will show you the high school that you're zoned for under the different options.
And just to add, if you keep scrolling down in the platform, that'll load a refresh map for each of the 4 scenarios, because depending on your actual location, each scenario may have some different impacts and implications to you.
Great point, Mike. And the last thing I'll mention on that is we do have static maps that show the high school attendance zones that were in the PowerPoint presentations that were given to the board back in October. So that's another option as well if you choose to not use the interactive platform.
And I will add that we do have a demo video on using the interactive map in addition to what Mr. Gallagher and Mr. Zumba have said here today. That can be found on our website along with information about redistricting, lexridge5.org/redistricting. You'll find the demo of the interactive map there and additional information on the map. So please go to lexridge5.org/redistricting. Let's go to a few more questions. There's a question about whether 5, the district's virtual program for the year, will continue and how that might alleviate overcrowding or remove the need for redistricting. So, Dr. Melton, I believe you will take this. Our instructional chief has exited the meeting, so Dr. Melton will field this question.
Okay, I may need some of those pieces again, Ms. Goggins. So it sounds like magnets and alleviating. Oh, you said the virtual program. Ask me that again, Ms. Goggins.
Will the virtual program continue next year?
Okay.
And how might that alleviate overcrowding?
Okay.
In other words, is there a need for redistricting?
Right. First point I would say is Piney Woods Elementary is prepared to open in the fall of 21. So that's an important point. And of course, we need a staffing plan and an assignment plan for our students, who's going to be enrolled there and how that school is going to operate, as far as who will be attending school there and working there. Second piece of that is going to be, we have plans with the instructional department to bring some things to the board in the near future. Dr. Harris, of course, is directly involved with the management of our choice process. So that window is going to be starting after the first of the year. So we need to make sure that we have the position for planning for the next academic year already. So it is our hope in School District 5 that we can have the option of an online program to be included with our choice process, that our community has gotten familiar with our online application. Dr. Harris and his team, along with Mr. Giuliano and his, work very collaboratively with that process. So if there's the will of the board that we continue to operate with an online version that we call 5, I want to make sure that I'm deliberate to explain that, because some people hear 5 and they think we mean the number 5, but our virtual program of 5, we need to take it to the board to get their interest. And if the board does have support of that, that will be included with our choice application process during the typical time frame that we coordinate. Ms. Goggins, did I get all the pieces of that for you?
You did, Dr. Melton. Thank you so much. This next question is for Mr. Gallagher and Mr. Zumba. How are the uncertainties qualified and quantified in your models?
I'll begin there, and Pat, feel free to chime in if needed. As part of any kind of projection activity, there's a projection of anything, whether it's enrollment or even forecasting weather. I guess there's always some assumptions that need to be made there and some uncertainty. So what we look to do is be able to minimize those. We have good historic data, as Pat mentioned, as well as birth data, housing data, in order to be able to project forward. But as we get into sort of years 5 to 10, we need to be able to make some of those assumptions. So what we do is we've been through this process many times, and we have a way where we calibrate our model so that we assure that we have accuracy around 1% annually, so that it's not going to deviate anything greater than that. So, obviously in a year of a pandemic, if you were to compare the numbers, it would be some greater deviation there. But I think that's a norm, an event that's more of an exception than the norm. But going forward, we have that built into the model, that sensitivity. And we also look at this low, medium, and high to be able to use that as a barometer for changes in different conditions that drive housing. So those economic drivers, the demographic drivers, the housing drivers that impact enrollment. And then last, the area that, as Pat mentioned earlier, we don't develop our plans around your school facilities maximum capacity. We develop these enrollment targets, which have a little bit of headroom or buffer space built into them to ensure that if there is any uncertainty that's not picked up by our methodology, that we have some additional headroom there to be able to accommodate students to have a plan that has longevity built into it. We really like to be able to be forward thinking as we develop these plans, because we know the effort that goes into it, not only in drawing it up, but also for the community of following along, and then ultimately the district, the board, and the administrators putting it in place and then moving it forward as sort of the new normal. Pat, do you have anything that we need to add to that?
Nope, all set. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We've received lots of questions about Spring Hill High School and whether that school can be brought up to a more traditional high school to alleviate overcrowding. I think Dr. Melton is going to speak to that. The question is, has there been any consideration to make Spring Hill High School a traditional school rather than a magnet school?
Thank you, Ms. Goggins. Of course, for those that may be new to our community, Spring Hill High School originated with the vision that it become a magnet high school that has a career pathways directly aligned with the center. And of course, all of our high schools have some direct alignments with the center. So Spring Hill was open with the idea and then later received federal funding, of which we work within compliance of those magnet federal funds for the next couple of years to get that school up and going. Of course, that federal grant has now ended. We have a grant of a different amount operating in different schools of choice with our magnet themes, but Spring Hill is no longer under that compliance that's expected with the federal funds that we had received previously. When it comes to Spring Hill, just like it would be for Elementary 13, we have board policy, and Ms. Goggins, unfortunately, I don't have that with me since I'm not on site, but we have board policy that requires the board to take action or have the will of the board determine attendance lines for schools. So if Spring Hill were to become a traditional high school with a zoned attendance, then the board would need to take action to identify where those zones and the boundaries of that school would be. From an administrative side of things, if Spring Hill were to become a traditional comprehensive high school, of course, we have to look through the lens of the cost that School District 5 would incur of athletics. If you have a high school that's participating with the High School League of South Carolina to offer a variety of sports, then the facilities question of where would those athletes participate? Would they travel consistently to one venue versus another? So there's some pieces that would need to be looked through with that. And then, of course, the question is, how does that affect choice? Because currently, Dr. Harris and his team, along with the Magnet Office and Mr. Giuliano, monitor the process for our pool of applicants. So every year we do our random lottery via our system of platform of online participation. We have to manage and create what students are offer the invitation to enter into Spring Hill for those seats that become available, and of course always that incoming freshman class. So there'll be some administrative things that we would need to work out, that if Spring Hill were to become a zone school, are there available seats left for others to choose to attend as a school of choice? Would there be other seats available for the magnet theme? Of course, there are policies for our magnet theme participation, and Dr. Harris brought to the board not so long ago. I'm not sure, like I said, recently, I'm not sure if I could identify what year, because not so long ago could have been yesterday. I don't know. So Dr. Harris did bring to the board, and they supported the revision of a policy that if a student enters into a magnet school of choice, their incoming year, they finish that year at the highest level. So if Spring Hill were to become a zoned high school, and we already have students that are attending Spring Hill as upperclassmen or whatever year this were to be implemented, how does that affect those students that are already assigned to attend Spring Hill? Because by policy, they're allowed the opportunity to finish the highest grade. And of course, for Spring Hill, that'd be for graduation. So might there be a wave of policy that the board would require that the administration do some things differently to create a whole new cohort, or might it be tiered into the way Spring Hill was opened, of the underclassmen then build into the upperclassmen over time? So has that been considered and discussed? I would encourage those that are interested to go back and listen into the board meetings that have video that are posted to make sure that you have heard conversations. But can I say that has been a specific directive to be included by the contract? It has not. It has been the work of this contract, and the focus that Dr. Harris and I have been working on is to take how we are currently using magnets and choice successfully and build upon that, short-term and long-term. But if there would be a will to change Spring Hill, it would require a variety of policies to be reviewed, to be waived, to be changed, so that the administration could execute those details. Dr. Harris, did I forget anything that maybe I need to have included that I may not have said?
No, Dr. Melton, I don't think I have anything to add to your response. Thank you.
And Dr. Melton, we want to thank you for your time. I know you have to get back to your superintendent's roundtable. Do you have any closing remarks you'd like to offer?
I thank everyone that's participated with this call, that submitted questions, that's listened in. If you've not been to see our interactive map, please do. If you've not reviewed our FAQ, please do. And my request for all of you that are listening in is, how can you help us become key communicators to get the word out in our community, to make sure that everyone in School District 5 is aware of this important process, and how can their voices be heard? I think our board has proven that they want to hear from our community. They want to know the feedback of our community. So stay tuned, go back and find the board meetings where this may have been on the agenda. You review the agenda to see what's on it, and then you could find that video that's directly linked with that you can go back and listen in to be informed yourself. I encourage you to use information rather than second and third hand information. Anytime people start relaying things of others, I have found in my own life that it's based upon my experience or my understanding. So it's my encouragement to each of those that are listening in today and participating. Please commit to go get information for yourself, to inform your own opinion, and to create your voice and your message so that we can hear you and our board can be informed as to any feedback that you may have. And I can say, Ms. Goggins, you and Dr. Harris both have seen many of the emails. We're getting some creative ideas from our community. So we hope that we can listen for constructive feedback rather than critical feedback. With criticism, you take it in and review it. But with constructive, you take it in and you improve what you're doing. So I would encourage our community to stay as engaged as you always have been. This is a unique situation, and I hope this conversation today is one more evidence of our commitment to be inclusive, to be engaging, and to make sure you have access to the information that we feel that you need. Ms. Goggins, if any questions that I need, if you could let me know that later, but otherwise I have full trust that the team that's online can answer questions that are needed for today, and I so much appreciate the coordination for this unique event.
Thank you for your leadership, Dr. Melton, and we will stay on the line for just a little under 15 minutes more for our lunch and learn, and answer as many questions as we can that are coming into the form. You still can submit those questions. We will look at all the questions. We'll add some to our FAQ after this event. And if your question was not answered, please don't hesitate to email your questions into us. That would be at redistricting@lexrich5.org. Again, that's redistricting@lexrich5.org. This next question is for our experts. It's asked, why is Wescott neighborhood in the rezoning for Dutch Fork? We have a Chapin address. So I think the larger question is about Chapin address, Irmo, Columbia. We have different mailing addresses, but what did you look at? Did you look at the cities, or how did you divide these three clusters into the rezoning plans you have?
So I can start, and Mike, feel free to fill in. We didn't take into consideration postal address. We really strove for really two things. One being proximity. So areas that we moved under the different options, we tried to move them. We tried to move areas that were fairly close to another school, so that we're minimizing travel times, and also the size of the neighborhood. We wanted to make sure, again, we're moving large enough areas that we're addressing overcrowding, while also ensuring that there are some larger peer groups, so that if folks do move, they're moving with a larger number of classmates that they're familiar with. And those were really our two kind of guiding principles as we were deciding which areas to move.
Yeah, Pat, I think that did a good job of summing it up. Postal addresses, even though some do relate to those, they don't always represent some of the existing attendance zones, nor where those enrollment clusters are on an individual neighborhood by neighborhood basis.
Excellent, thank you. This next question we've heard during the first event. It's about socio-economic and racial divides, and whether those two things were considered in the scenarios that we see. This individual says that she just moved into the Rose Oak subdivision off Farm Creek Road, and like so many others, she wants to make sure that whatever scenario is chosen for the district does not widen a divide socioeconomic or racial wise. Can you address that?
I'll get us started on that one, and others could feel free to chime in. We reviewed the overarching demographics as part of this process, and when we were really sort of honing in on the primary charge, which was to create an attendance zone for Piney Woods, as well as alleviate a lot of the overcrowding in the Chapin cluster. Any of the options we put forward for that really didn't have a tremendous impact on widening any divide from east to west or north to south there. We did not have at hand the individual student race and ethnicity data as part of this process to really dive into each individual neighborhood, look at the composition, and use that as a driving factor. But rather, we just used the total enrollment and the projected future enrollment as driving factors, rather than using student characteristics, whether it being socioeconomic or race and ethnicity, as decision-making factors for this process. So it was really guided by the overarching future enrollments overall.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This next person says that they are wondering what the main differences are in the scenarios. They can't compare them because you have to look at maps individually. So can you just go through the scenarios really quickly, again, 1 through 4, and point out some of the main differences between them?
Sure. And I think the maps that were in the presentation in October may be a little clearer because they highlighted the specific neighborhoods that we moved. So I'd be happy to go over the interactive map, although I will say they may be clearer to review in that PowerPoint presentation that's posted. All right. So each scenario we really strove to solve the overcrowding in the Chapin cluster and fill out the attendance zone for Piney Woods, really ensure that enrollment balance across all schools. The big differences between the scenarios are the number of students that we moved, the breadth of the area that we impacted, as well as which specific neighborhoods were moved, and in some instances, grade configuration. So scenario 1 assumes that Piney Woods is a pre-K through 4 school like the other schools in the Chapin cluster. We really focused our efforts within the Chapin cluster itself. So outside of Lake Murray, Chapin Elementary, and Piney Woods, there are very few neighborhoods that were moved, with the exception of an area of Irmo, as well as the Rolling Creek area of Ballantyne for the high school. Scenario 2 is very similar. You'll notice as I scroll here, the maps look nearly identical. The big difference between scenario 2 and scenario 1 is that in scenario 2, we introduce 5th grade to Piney Woods Elementary School. And that allows us to shrink the attendance zone, and that allows additional neighborhoods that are immediately adjacent to Chapin Elementary School to stay within that community. There's a pretty big difference between scenarios 1 and 2 and scenario 3. We move a lot more areas, so we're not just focused on the Chapin cluster for this particular option. We're making we're moving many different areas to really achieve that optimal enrollment at every building within the district. And so as you click through the different neighborhoods, you can see there's many smaller areas that are moved, and that helps optimize enrollment, but that comes at the expense of you're disrupting a larger number of students and families, and you're moving smaller peer groups. And finally, scenario 4 is, I would say, kind of a hybrid between scenarios 1 and 2, where we're minimizing disruption, and scenario 3, where we're trying to optimize enrollment across all buildings. And so we focus most of our effort within the Chapin cluster, but there are some smaller pockets that are moved within the Dutch Fork and Irmo clusters. Again, I would encourage you to review the October presentation that's posted on the district website. That'll have little call outs that show specifically which neighborhoods are moved under each option.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gallagher. We have a question that's, I think I can address this. Have mailers been sent out to the community potentially impacted by all of this? We have not sent mailers out. I can speak in terms of trying to share information with the community. We've used our website, and we've used some tools such as our social media sites as well. So you see a lot of marketing departments now use targeted social media instead of mailers to try to get information out. But as Dr. Melton said, the community's given us lots of great ideas. We'll certainly discuss this and see if this is something we can utilize to educate the community, because education and information is our goal with all of this. I think this next question might be for Dr. Harris. And it says, are you considering allowing kids to stay in the same cluster when they are older? Dr. Harris, I think this points back to our comments earlier about exemptions and whether those will be granted.
Absolutely. I tend to agree. We do and will continue to explore options regarding the exemption, oftentimes referred to as grandfather, but we like to refer to it as exemptions. We do recognize how important it is for many of our students who have started in a particular school or particular geographical area of the district to continue. We understand that, and as where and when we can, we want to make our opportunity available to extend an exemption contingent upon the finalization of this redistricting initiative.
Excellent. We have just a few more minutes here in our lunch and learn. So I want to give everybody an opportunity to make a few closing remarks before we end and conclude our event today. I want to thank our transportation director who has stayed on the line the entire time. Thank you so much. We didn't field any questions, but thank you for being there, because we may get some questions, and we certainly know the importance of transportation to everything we do and to the redistricting process. So if you might just touch again on your plans and how you're preparing for this redistricting of School District 5.
Well, just overall, we've looked at all 4 plans, just trying to see the uniqueness of them, understand them, and start kind of coming up with a rough draft. As the board goes forward and selects 1 or maybe 2 plans to narrow it down, we'll drill down a little bit more in detail about what our needs are. Quite possibly come up with some suggestions that we might present at that time, and then look at what resources that we might need to move around or allocate to different locations to support whatever plan comes up with.
Thank you so much, Mr. Weissman. Dr. Harris, our Chief of Planning and Administration, has been working so closely with our experts throughout this entire process. Dr. Harris, do you have any closing remarks?
Just a brief remark, how thankful and appreciative I am of the community for spending time with us during this lunch and learn opportunity to learn more, to hear more in regarding to this redistricting initiative. Certainly thank our experts who, again, we have had numerous conversations and anticipate others as we finalize and move toward a close regarding redistricting initiatives. Again, contingent upon the direction that our local board of trustees would offer to us. And I certainly do thank you, Ms. Goggins and Mr. Wiseman, and others who are, as I say, kind of in-house, internal partners for being present and being available and helping with this initiative as well. This is a big bite of the apple, and we recognize that. And so it just goes to show how important it is that we continue to talk about it so that we can learn more about it so that as we move forward. So thank all of you for that. Continue to reiterate the email, the dedicated email, the website, the FAQ that's made available, and look forward to hearing from you should you have questions, suggestions, or ideas that you'd like to offer. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to give Mr. Gallagher and Mr. Zumba an opportunity to give any remarks they have.
Thanks, Ms. Goggins. Yeah, I'd like to echo same thing Dr. Harris said. It's been great. I know it's been a much different kind of process for all of us with COVID, but I think it's been great working with the staff, administration, the board, and hearing from the community. Everybody's been staying with us, following along, firing off those email questions, logging on to the online viewer, checking things out, giving us that valuable input. And I ask that they just continue to persevere and stay with us as we go work our way through this process and ultimately lead to a recommendation for the Board of Trustees. Thank you for everyone's time.
I'll echo what Mike and Dr. Harris said. Thank you, everybody, for participating today. If you have any additional questions, feel free to send them to us through the district redistricting email address. And we look forward to continuing this dialogue as the board moves towards a decision. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And that concludes our Lunch and Learn virtual event on redistricting. We want to remind you again that you can still submit questions on redistricting at redistricting.lexridge5.org. That's redistricting@lexridge5.org. And visit our website at lexridge5.org/redistricting to see video from our last event and the video from today. We want to thank the community as well and all those that joined us today. We hope you have a great afternoon.